special day, and I wrote it a really long time ago. This is a chapter in the book. I'm just going to read an excerpt from it, and I think that'll be what I say. I can't remember the day in full anymore. The memories hit me like snapshots of light, bright like headlights shining into the darkness. Pictures of the moments, frightening me awake to relive it until it fades, going back to black, fading completely back into the dark of my present. It was a little after 11 a.m. Freshman at high school, Richmond Hill High, had an 11:50 to 4:30 school day, and I was always the last one out of the house. Normally my mother and Robert were around, but that day they were out running errands. As I walked to the door to leave, the phone rang. I saw on the caller ID that it was my cousin Rimawi calling from his house, so I answered. "Hello," I said, not sure if it was him or his wife, and not sure why they'd be calling my mom's house, or why they'd be calling so late in the morning. "Hello, Eman, marhaba, it's Rimawi. Is your mother there?" He asked in a rushed voice, as if he were trying to hide his emotions. "Hey, yeah, my mom isn't here. She went out, and I don't know when she's coming back. I actually have to leave too. I have to go to school before I'm late." "Oh, well, you don't have to go. Your dad doesn't want you to go. It's a special day. We're going to come and get you, and then get you Hamzi and Jamila." "What special day? It's not a special day, and everyone's gone already anyway, and I have to go too." I laughed because he wasn't making any sense, and if it was a joke, it wasn't a good one. "It's a special day. He doesn't want you to go to school." His accent got thicker with each word. He was nervous, but I didn't know why. He just didn't want me to leave the house. "Uncle Rimawi, I have to go, and everyone's already gone. No one else is here. Just call back later, and my mom should be here," I said to him. But I had a feeling he wasn't going to listen. "Your dad said it was a special day, so please don't leave. Just stay and tell Hamzi and Jamila not to leave. We're going to come get you, okay?" He replied. I didn't know what to think, but I thought he lost his mind, and since he obviously hadn't listened to me when I said everyone was gone already, I was just going to tell him okay. There was no telling anyone anyway, because they were all at school. "Okay, it's a special day, but I have to go, so I'll talk to you later, okay?" I didn't know what else to say to him. "We're going to be there soon, okay? Just stay home. Your dad wants you to," was his response. "Okay, I'll see you later," I said, laughing since it all sounded so silly. "Bye, Uncle Rimawi." I called him Uncle sometimes since he was my dad's age. We were all cousins, though, on my dad's side of the family, both young and old. "I'll see you soon, inshallah, Eman. Bye," and he said and hung up. I shook my head, walked out of the door, down the steps, out the front of the house, and on my way to school 3 blocks away. I was in zoology class later that day when the counselor came to get me. Zoology was my favorite class. I was a freshman, 14. Everyone else was older. We worked with animals and got to find the commonalities between them and dinosaurs. The teacher was really great and made me really love science. Another reason it was my favorite class was because I was a freshman in a class full of juniors and seniors. It wasn't a freshman class, but I got in it because of my grades in middle school. They couldn't move me up in English and history yet, but they did as soon as I was a sophomore. It was the best they could do in a non-specialized New York City public high school in Queens. It wasn't necessarily harder. It just gave the illusion that it was. I sat in class, writing notes, and getting ready for the session work. We were talking about evolution, and someone asked our teacher, a beautiful late 20s, early 30s black woman who always wore red lipstick, nice perfume, and designer suits, if she believed in God. She looked at the person who asked the question. Obviously, no one was paying attention yet, but the question sparked everyone's interest. She put her thumb and her index finger very close together and said, "A little bit," and smiled. "I'm a scientist. I believe in science. I believe more in evolution." Everyone laughed and said okay and left it alone. A few minutes after that, someone knocked at the door, and it was my guidance counselor. She was a very tall, skinny, older Jewish woman with shoulder-length gray blonde hair and big, big blue eyes. She had been guidance counselor for longer than I had been alive and was so nice to me for no reason at all. I guess she knew about the circumstances of my life and knew they weren't exactly perfect. And unlike many of my schoolmates, I didn't just want to live life and let it go and become a statistic. I wanted to fight for my rights, for my education, for my happiness, and not be that statistic at all. We all turned to look at her. She stood there and said in front of the entire class that my mom was there to get me. I wondered why my mom had come to school to get me. I wondered if I was in trouble for something. We only lived 3 blocks from the high school, so it wasn't the norm. Good student or not, sometimes trouble found me. Or maybe it was because I was a teenager and that's what happened with teenagers. The door to the classroom was at the back of the room. I normally sat to the front, so I didn't get distracted by what was going on around me. I gathered my things and walked out the door. My big black boots thudded hard with embarrassment in the silence of the classroom. I smiled at her, and she smiled back sadly at me. She was a very transparent woman. She wore her happiness, her sadness, her disappointment, and excitement on her sleeve. It was her greatest strength and her greatest weakness. We walked up 1 floor to the guidance office where my mom was sitting. In my boots, I was much taller than her, which was about 6 foot. Normally, I was 5'8", and still an inch taller than my mom, but at that moment, I felt really small for some reason, like I wasn't going to like what was going to happen. She looked sad, but also angry. I was still confused. Now my stomach turned as if I was in deep shit. My mind raced, trying to figure out what she had found out. I couldn't think of anything. I wasn't doing much, just going to school and being goth. That was enough for me since there had been so much excitement in the previous several months. Just sign her out of the office and they'll let the rest of her teachers know she's gone for the day, the guidance counselor said to my mom. Ma nodded and got up, her tired-looking face even more tired and haunted than usual. Had she been crying? I didn't have the courage to make eye contact. We walked out of the office silently. She signed me out and we walked out of the front door of the school, by the school safety's office, also known by the students as pain in the ass, power tripping rent-a-cops. And she signed me out there too. We walked down to the front steps slowly, holding our breaths, too afraid to break the silence. We walked into the bright March sun, never finding the courage to exhale. Everyone was in the van. Everyone. Hamzy, Jamila, Daniel, Melissa. Everyone was in the van. Why? My brother, my sister, my cousins. What happened? Once we got in the house, Ma told us that she had something important to tell us, and to put our things down and come sit in the living room. My Uncle Scott and Robert were sitting on the gray couch, and asked Jamila and I to sit next to them. Hamzy and Daniel sat on the floor next to the coffee table. I don't remember where Melissa was. I know my mom was sitting later, but I can't remember whether she sat or stood when she told us. I think she began to cry, but I can't remember. I did see tears, though. I can't remember if she was referring to Rebel calling, but I have the feeling that she did. She looked at us with such pain in her face, a pain that looked so familiar because something painful was always happening to us, and something painful had happened again. She told us that her father had had a heart attack that morning and didn't get to the hospital in time and died. My brother was 13 at the time. Immediately screamed, cursed, got up, ran to his room, threw everything on the floor in a crash and stormed in a rage. My sister, who was 8, began weeping in a way I had never heard her cry before. A raging, breathy scream of a cry, as if her heart had literally been torn from her chest. That was when Robert put his hands around her. My head swam with grief and guilt, and my only thought was that it was my fault that he died, and everyone thought the same thing. My Uncle Scott had put his arm around me as I cried. I cried silent, painful, guilty tears. My parents had been divorced and were with different people, but the love never went away. They loved each other, but just couldn't be together. And they had the 3 of us between them. It was hard not to feel the loss too, and it was hard for her not to blame herself. Years later, she told me that she thought that if they had stayed together, he might still be alive. A lot of things would have been different if he stayed alive. A lot of things would have been different if they stayed together. Ma told us that my stepmother, who I didn't like from the beginning, hadn't called 911 and instead called my cousin Rebecca. Since my dad lived in Staten Island with his new wife and new son, and my cousin lived 15 minutes away from them, she felt inclined to call him instead of an ambulance. She didn't know. Maybe. Maybe she was nervous and scared, and she panicked and called Rebecca instead. Maybe. Even to this day, it makes me wonder if she did something on purpose. She was 26, and my dad was 40. And although age makes no difference to me in relationships, it did in this one. She was more of a child than me, and I was 14. And my father made it seem like he had all these extravagant things when he didn't. An arranged marriage to a guy who was almost 40, with 3 kids, 2 ex-wives, had something of value for a woman in her 20s whose family wanted to give her away and send her to another country. I tried to like her. I really did. But there was something about her that rubbed me the wrong way. And when he died, that something came out. And no one wanted to tell me I was right. But they listened to me about her after that. And that something came in the form of questions about insurance money in his house and finding a way to the cash on his death. My mom told us the details in that moment. We were going over to my cousin's house. There, the rest of the family on my dad's side, who was in New York or near, decided to come together. This cousin, Hassan, was at least 15 years older than my dad and his first cousin. His kids ranged from about 7 to almost 30. He and his wife, also cousins and ours, took it upon themselves to take care of my father's funeral and burial arrangements. What that means was while we were in school, that same day, they had taken him to a morgue, embalmed and cleansed and dressed him, and buried him in New Jersey in a Muslim graveyard. So by the afternoon, when my mom got home and got us out of school, he was completely gone. It was another shock to my system. I automatically went into attack mode. How dare they? Why didn't we get to say goodbye? Being angry in that moment felt better to me than feeling sadness and loss for my father. I could hold on to anger and channel the energy into action. Years later, as I searched for more cousins around the country by searching online and writing letters to them, a cousin who was also in his 20s living in Louisiana and whose father had grown up with mine told me that Muslims believed that the soul was trapped in the body, and until the body was blessed and buried in sacred ground, that they were trapped. When all this happened, I didn't know that. And when I asked my mom about that, she knew. But she didn't tell us that. And I guess my cousins and aunts and uncles assumed that we knew. For years, I harbored this scathing anger towards my cousins for doing that. Even after getting the information, I was angry. But I understood the importance and why it had all happened that way, even though I still believed they could have waited. He would have wanted them to wait for us, his children. And I'll leave it at that.